ಎಷ್ಟಿದೆ?
22.
Attendees
We'll wait.
20.
So another 5 ನಿಮಿಷ wait ಮಾಡೋಣ.
Definitely, we can wait for another 2-3 minutes.
Yes, yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We will start at 7:35.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir. Okay.
So start ಮಾಡುವ sir.
Yeah.
Bijay sir.
Just unmute. Yeah.
Sir Bijay sir.
Yeah, good evening to one and all. On behalf of Indian Psychiatric Society Karnataka chapter, I welcome all of you for this psychopathology series. This is the eighth lecture in this series, in which various speakers have spoken already with eminent speakers as well as eminent chairpersons have chaired these sessions, and many of the participants have enjoyed, and many of them have liked the series so far. And in the today's eighth series, we have another young Samir Belvi Mangalwade, uh, giving lecture today, and sir,
Hello.
He must be traveling. Yeah, that is the issue.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
we can carry on. Yeah,
welcome to Dr. Harisha sir,
yeah. Thank you.
and I welcome I welcome Dr. Samir also, and
Thank you,
also
sir.
welcome Samir,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
and yeah, I welcome Dr. Narayan Mutalik and Harish Kulkarni, who were the moderators, and also the team from Icon Laboratories and all the participants. And now I would like to hand over the mic to Dr. Narayan and Dr. Harish, the moderators of today's session. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bijal sir. As sir told, it is the eighth session in a psychopathology series from organized by IPSKC and Telearogya team. So without wasting much time, I want to introduce Dr. Harisha Jalantapettu sir, who is the chairperson for today's session. Sir has completed his MBBS from Mysore Medical College under Mysore University, and MD in Psychiatry from Bangalore Medical College under Bangalore University. And he has another qualification, postgraduate diploma in medical law and ethics from National Law School of India University, Bangalore. And currently, sir is working as professor and head Department of Psychiatry at Subbaiah Institute of Medical Sciences, Shimoga. Sir has many papers and publications for his credit, and he has many awards. And among them, he is a recipient of a national award, IMA Dr. Ramchandra N. Murthy Award in Psychiatry for the year 2016-17 in recognition of the services rendered during the year. And he was felicitated by the National Festival Committee, Government of Karnataka on 26th January 2010 on the occasion of 61st Republic Day at Bhadravati. And he was felicitated with Chikitsak Ratan Award by the Global Society for Health and Educational Growth, New Delhi, for achieving excellence in the medical field on 30th September 2005 in a function held at New Delhi. And he has multiple positions held. Member of Juvenile Justice Board, Shimoga. He was a co-chairperson of Forensic Psychiatry and Law Specialty Section, Indian Psychiatric Society, and he is currently the chairperson of Academic Subcommittee, IMA Karnataka State Branch, and president of Indian Psychiatric Society Karnataka chapter from 2014 to 15. He was the vice president of Indian Medical Association Karnataka State Branch from 2015 to 16, and president Sahyadri Neuropsychiatric Association, Shimoga, Karnataka, and faculty at UNICEF IMA program on child sexual abuse prevention and response. He was a resource person for the State Mental Health Authority, Government of Karnataka, for Mano Chintana programs aired on Chandana TV channel, Prasara Bharati, Doordarshan, Government of India. And he was chairperson, membership drive committee, IMA Karnataka State Board from 2016 to 17, president of IMA Bhadravati branch from 2011 to 12, and he was a resource person for Taluk Legal Cell Bhadravati. And with much academic background, I welcome Dr. Harisha Jalantapettu to chair today's session. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Mutalik, for the introduction.
Over to Dr. Harish Kulkarni to introduce our today's speaker.
Thank you, Narayan sir. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Samir Belvi Mangalwade sir, in the today's program. Sir did his MBBS from KIMS Hubli in 2007. He did his postgraduate in psychiatry from King George Medical College, Lucknow in 2012. Sir is currently working as assistant professor in Department of Psychiatry in KIMS Hubli. He also has a practice in City Psychiatry Center, Hubli. He is a co-chairperson and joint director of Professional Protection Scheme of Indian Psychiatry Society. He is member of various associations, including Indian Medical Association, Indian Psychiatry Society, Indian Psychiatry Society Karnataka chapter. He is EC member of Deccan Psychiatric Association as well. He is a member of IAPP, Indian Association of Private Psychiatrists. He is immediate past secretary of Psychiatric Guild of North Karnataka. He has presented various scientific papers at state and national conferences. He has more than 10 scientific papers published in national and international journals. I welcome you to today's program, sir, and it was my pleasure introducing you to the audience today. I request today's chairperson, Dr. Harisha sir, to give a brief introduction about today's topic.
Yeah, thank you. The respected President, Indian Psychiatry Society, Karnataka State Branch, the President-elect, the Honorary Secretary of Indian Psychiatry Society, Karnataka chapter, the office bearers of IPSKC, and today's speaker, Dr. Sabir sir, the moderators, Dr. Narayan Mutalik and Dr. Harish. So today's topic, that is about the motor disorders, is quite apt at this juncture. At the outset, I acknowledge the contribution of Frank Fish on this occasion, because this particular book is the all-time favorite of our postgraduates. Whenever a postgraduate enters the department will ask them to ask him or her to go through the Fish clinical psychopathology, because they should know the basic phenomenology, symptomatology. So this will be for about 3 to 4 months. Then only they can go through some of the nosological classification like CD10 and DSM-5. So now the subject, motor disorder, everyone should understand. Everyone should know the motor disorders, which could be accompanied in almost all the mental disorder, starting from F00 to F99, from dementia to the last chapter. In the past, whenever we see an individual with some motor disorders, with the mannerisms, stereotypy behavior, and we can diagnose from a distance that it could be chronic schizophrenia. Now the number of such cases have come down thanks to the third generation antipsychotics. Motor disorders should be identified mainly because one is to diagnose the case. The other thing is which one has to be treated first. Sometimes a mental disorder could be accompanied by a motor disorder as a primary motor disorder. Sometimes it could be a drug induced. We can recognize a patient coming to your outpatient department with some sort of rigidity and restlessness. So you can say that this particular patient has gone to some other psychiatrist. If they are not on any tablets, then you should think of any injectables. So that shows that gives an idea that this person is on medication. That's the reason why this particular motor disorder. So we should know whether to treat a motor disorder first or treat a disease first. Next thing is, today we are talking only about the psychopathology of the motor disorder. On the other hand, you should also know something about the neuroanatomy of the motor disorder. You know, the movements of the body is controlled by two types of tracts. One is pyramidal tract, one is extrapyramidal tract. The voluntary movements of the body activity are controlled by pyramidal, mainly cortical innervations, corticospinal or corticobulbar. Corticospinal is mainly the muscles of the trunk and limbs. The corticobulbar especially for the facial muscles and the muscles of deglutition. So this is when you talk about the motor disorder per se, then you expect basically the voluntary muscles, and you can expect some sort of weaknesses or specificity like upper motor neuron disease. But here we talk about basically the extrapyramidal symptom, mainly the extrapyramidal tract, basically deep brain structure like basal ganglia, midbrain, and brainstem. So you should know, you should have the knowledge of brain structures and its function while talking about the motor disorder. Though we are not discussing about this at this here in, because we talk only about the clinical psychopathology. That's it. So with this brief background, I request our today's speaker, a well-known speaker, Dr. Samir sir, to go ahead with this presentation and should be able to present this particular case for about within about 30 to 40 minutes. Then we can go for the question answer session. So I request the speaker to go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Harisha sir. Good evening all. At the outset, I would like to thank the office bearers, the EC members of IPSKC for giving me this opportunity. And I personally feel this is a very good initiative taken by the state branch of Indian Psychiatric Society in view of the current pandemic and obviously the learning which occurs through such platforms. Yes, very rightly put forward by Dr. Harisha sir that why it is important for us to understand the basic functional neuroanatomy and the association with various motor disorders. But as today's topic is based on the textbook of clinical psychopathology by Fish, my talk will be focusing more on those areas which are mentioned in the Fish clinical psychopathology book. But then obviously it is more clinical oriented. Would like to have the presentations in the form of real case scenarios. There are certain videos which I think would be of help to most of you. So without much delay, I would take this opportunity and we would begin with the today's topic. I hope the screen is visible and I am audible.
Very much.
Yes.
Screen is visible, Dr. Naran?
Yeah, screen is. Now
kindly share the screen.
You need to share the screen.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm doing that. I hope it's fine now.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, motor disorders is the topic of today's guest lecture, as some textbooks would like to call it as disorders of motility. When we look into this area, I think there are two basic approaches. Even historically, there were two basic approaches in terms of identifying, diagnosing, and managing these motor disorders. There is a neurological approach where people like Albom, Wernicke, or Kleist have tried to give a descriptive analysis of such psychopathology, try to give an association with various functioning of the brain and look at it from a neuroanatomical perspective rather than have just a picture of a phenomenology or a psychopathology. And at the other end, we have what is important to us, presentation of these motor disorders from a psychological perspective, that is the function of a conscious mind or the function of an unconscious mind. I think these differences are very obvious when we look at the varied presentations which come under these disorders of motility, right from mutism to stupor, to achynesias, to psychomotor disturbances, tics, tremors. So this is a watershed area between neurology and psychiatry. And what is important for us is to understand that the presentations can be varied. They can have a different explanation for a similar presentations. But our approach to diagnosing these motor disorders should be a holistic approach. We should also look at the neuroanatomical basis, have a descriptive analysis of such presentations, as well as try to correlate with the functional aspect of these presentations. So motor disorders which present to us can be either a subjective disturbances in the motor functions. Patients can present to us with complaints like giddiness or tremors or shakiness, or they can be something which is a part of our objective examination, what we do in our general physical examination and mental state examinations. One thing I would like to highlight at this point of time is we should not look at these presentations in isolation. Okay, they are always a part of a larger syndrome. They are always a part of a larger spectrum of problems associated with disturbances in other areas of higher mental function. Could be mood, could be thinking, perception, or could be the level of alertness. Okay, so looking at these presentation in isolation is not something that we should do. Now, as per the textbook of today's topic, now there are certain classification which Fish has made. Although there is not a scientifically proven classification, nor the classification holds good with an international standards, but it is important for us to understand how and why these presentations differ from each other. Okay, so with that respect, there is something called as abnormal subjective experiences of motor behavior. Now, this is something to do with ownership of those abnormal presentations, what we call as alienation of motor acts, which we commonly see with conditions like OCD, where there are mixed obsession and compulsions. Patient have an ego dystonic these activities. Patient says that even though he doesn't want to do a certain compulsive act or doesn't want to follow on those acts, but he's not under his own control. So the ownership of those motor acts is not something the individual puts upon himself. The similar thing happens with the dissociative states, trance and possession. Okay, so those acts come under what we call as subjective experiences of motor behavior. Okay? There is an alienation of these motor acts. Similarly, that happens with experience of passivity, or maybe something what you might have already come across in somatic passivity phenomena, or delusion of passivity that develops in a psychotic patient secondary to another perceptual abnormality or a thought disturbance. So there is this core difference of ownership. The person believes that he's not under control, or they are not his or her own acts. So this is something, the way sometimes these most motor disturbances can present to us. This is the classification which is given in the textbook of psychopathology by Fish. So I'll try to cover the following topics under these headings: disorders of adaptive movements, non-adaptive movements, motor speech disorders, postures, drug induced, which is very important, although the section is very minimally represented in the book, but then I have kind of made sure that the important aspects of drug induced movement disorders are also discussed. So disorders of adaptive movements are further classified as disorders of expressive movements that comes with part of a non-verbal communication, facial expression, expression through gestures, to body language. Disorders of reactive movements, where they say that these disorders are nothing but once there is a stimulus and you have to respond to a particular stimulus, then there are certain problems with that. And disorders of a certain goal-directed movements. Okay, so we'll see what are those disorders. Now, very commonly asked or commonly thought of sign, what we see even mentioned in the literature, is this Veragut sign, what we see in depression. Now, this is a part of disorders of expressive movements, where a particular mood state is being expressed non-verbally through certain changes in the physical structure of the human being. So this Veragut sign is nothing but the main fold in the upper eyelid is angulated. I think you can see this clearly here. This is case of Veragut sign we see in cases of depression. This is a normal, the epicanthus, medial and lateral epicanthus, and its reaction in its relation to the eyelid and forehead. There is something similarly called as omega sign, okay, which is represents the Greek omega letter, again, which is commonly seen with depression. Now, these are motor disturbances which tell us about the expressive problems what we see, and they are also part of a motor disorders what commonly present to our OPD. I mean, if you are not aware of these things, you probably tend to miss them, but otherwise they are very commonly seen, commonly identified disorders of facial expressions, especially in cases of depression. Now, similarly in mania, or maybe somebody who is excited, there is an elevated mood with the movements, the normal human movements in terms of gestures, the facial expressions, you tend to have them exaggerated. Okay, so similarly, what happens in a severe degree of mania, what we call as ecstasy or exaltation, where there is a grandiose sense of superiority. The patient may not necessarily have an exaggerated movements, okay, but then there is this intense rapturous look on his face. I mean, that can itself tell us that the patient is probably in ecstasy or exaltation. Similarly, what we see in schizophrenia is what we call as flat effect or a blunt effect, especially with predominant of negative symptoms, and what is commonly seen with Parkinson's, either primary idiopathic Parkinson's or drug-induced what we call as mask-like phase or expressionless phase, that is because of the side effects of antipsychotics or Parkinson disease per se. So these are something which are expressive in themselves, non-verbal communications, and they relate to underlying psychopathology. Okay, so this is something we need to look at. Even they come under disorders of motility. Now, disorders of reactive movements, what they say is reactive movements are those immediate automatic adjustment to new stimulus. This is very important, that it is something that happens as a reflex phenomena. Okay, something that happens sometimes under an unconscious act. Okay, so that tells us about the individual's levels of alertness and his adaptiveness to his immediate environment. Okay, so this is what these reactive movements tell us. So if there are problems of reactive movements, then probably we are looking at something which is not right when it comes to patient's level of alertness, that is his sensorium, or there is a problem with him with terms of adaptiveness. Now, there could be different reasons for that. A simple example could be a startle reflex, a flight or a fright reaction when there is a sudden autonomic hyperactivity. So there can produce some kind of a reactive movement. So that can be a part of your flight or flight responses. There is something term called motility psychosis, which is mentioned in this Fish textbook. He says that these reactive movements are lost in the inhibited phases. That means when there is no stimulus or when there is no voluntary movement occurring, so these reactive movements are lost. But whereas there is a spontaneous activity carried out by the individual, so he can carry out those activities in a normal way. So that is what he calls as motility psychosis. I couldn't find another term for it, but this is what he mentions. Then obviously there is what is common to us. Our practice is catatonia, where obviously these reactive movements are usually affected by what literature says as obstruction. Not literally meaning obstruction, but it's an obstruction to the functioning aspects of movements. And obviously in Parkinsonism, we see that there is a problem with reactive movements. The patient is not able to react with the same rate or same efficacy. Okay, so these are something what comes under reactive movements. Again, they tell us more about the level of alertness and adaptiveness rather than a motor dysfunction per se. Now, disorders of goal-directed movements is something which is very common to our profession, the psychomotor retardation part. This is very important, that this psychomotor retardation, although it can be objectively assessed and evaluated and rated, the most important part is that it is experienced subjectively by the patient. So it's the person who is suffering from, say, depression or other forms of mood disorders, has this subjective experience of lack of energy, lack of motivation, and he feels that he's unable to carry out his day-to-day activities. So that is what contributes as a psychomotor retardation. More commonly seen with severe depressive illnesses. Again, there can be a mild form where the psychomotor disturbances are associated with expressive motor disorders that we discussed earlier. There is a term called downcast gaze, which we commonly use to describe a general appearance of a patient with depression coming to our OPD. And in more severe forms of psychomotor retardations, you literally feel that the person is, dragging himself. He is unable to move, is unable to perform any activities. The movements are pretty slow, sluggish. Okay, so that varies depending upon the severity of the underlying illnesses. So goal-directed movements are affected in a general psychomotor retardation, and it is something that is not specific to a particular act, but overall, most of the acts are affected, from day-to-day activities to any specific task or activities that we give as a part of our assessment. Coming to the second point in goal-directed movements, what is we commonly see in catatonia is something called as obstruction, that is irregular hindrance to psychic or motor activities. Now, again, may not be a neuroanatomical or a structural basis to it. It's more of a functional obstruction. Sometimes what we see, a patient is unable to begin an action at one point of time, but later maybe he will carry out that activity without difficulty. So this is commonly seen with catatonia. Okay, so there is some kind of a stimulus given to patients with catatonia, maybe verbal or maybe physical stimulus. So after a certain point of time, when you shift the attention to a different topic, the patient replies back to your first question or carries out the activities of your first instruction. So this is also very common. At times, voluntary action seems to break through obstruction and is carried out rather quickly. That is what happens in a catatonic excitement. Okay, a patient is in catatonia, is mute, he is psychomotor retardation is there. He's sitting at one place. There is no change in his posture. He's looking at one point in a wall. There is staring gaze, and he's there for 10-15 minutes without any movement. And suddenly, with excitement, he gets up and runs outside the room. So this is very common that happens in catatonic excitement. So this is also a part of obstruction. There are different things, the effort needed to overcome this obstruction is not dependent on the peripheral factors. It is not dependent on the environment or the stimulus, but it's related to the person who is carrying out this act itself. So this is something that is very commonly seen in presentations with stupors. Okay, even organic stupors, not just functional stupor, but organic stupors. And this is because of what the book says as a phenomenology of obstruction. Coming to the third part in this section, what is very confusing at times is mannerisms or stereotypy, and what is stereotypy and what is mannerisms. So these are unusual repetitive performances. So these acts are repeated and they are goal directed activities. So now this is how you differentiate a mannerism from a stereotype behavior. Okay, so both are repetitive, whereas stereotypy is not a goal directed activity. Mannerisms is most of the time a goal directed motor action or maintenance of an unusual modification of an adaptive postures. So a lot of the time we ourselves have certain mannerisms when performing certain acts. Okay, so mannerism may not always be pathological. Okay. So mannerisms are sometimes healthy responses to a particular situations. So not always all mannerism fit into a psychopathology or denote some kind of an abnormal behavior. Some examples what they give as use of strange words or high flown expressions, movements and postures which are keeping out of total situation can be regarded as mannerisms. As a part of psychopathology, mannerisms are very common in patients with psychosis, especially presenting as catatonia. We have a video about that. I'm sure you can relate and make some sense of what mannerism actually mean. So not always psychopathological, but they can be a part of normal presentations also. Coming to the second part, which is non-adaptive movements. Now these non-adaptive movements like tics or tremors or chorea or athetosis, these movements are based on principle of what is known as displacement activity or displacement behaviors. Now this is very similar to ego defense mechanism of displacement, where one form of energy is directed or transmitted from one situation to another situation. So a lot of animal experiments have been done in the past where they have seen that if you obstruct to a learned motor behavior of that particular animal, the animal will try to learn a new behavior which is totally inappropriate and irrelevant to the circumstances or social situation in order to overcome that obstruction. Okay, and psychologically it is said that displacement activity or displacement behavior are seen when a human being is faced with two conflicting stimulus. Okay, one is a rewarding or a motivating stimulus, and at the same time other stimulus could be something which is of threatening or a harmful stimulus. So in such cases there is an irrelevant motor behavior that happens, and that is called as non-adaptive motor behaviors. They can be two types, spontaneous or they can be induced. Now when they say induced, it is induced based on a certain environment or a specific situation or a specific conditions. So what comes under them are tics, again tremors, chorea, athetosis and stereotypy. So these are example of spontaneous movements which come under displacement behaviors or activities. Now tics are defined as rapid, brief, repetitive, non-rhythmic, purposeless motor movements, or it can be vocalizations, okay, involving discrete muscle groups, or it can be involving a single muscle group. Okay, this is very important. Now different textbooks give different definitions of tics, but I would suggest to refer to a standard neurological textbook or a textbook of medicine to have one uniform definition. So the most important part here is they are repetitive, rapid, non-rhythmic, and they don't serve any purpose. So it can be a motor movements or they can be a vocalizations, which we commonly see with patients have Tourette syndrome. Okay, the other part is most of the time these tics are suppressible with voluntary efforts. Now this is very important. When we do a clinical examination, This is something we need to ask or make sure that whether they can be controlled by voluntary control. So at times, most of the time, they are suppressible. Okay. So commonly affected areas could be eyes and face. There could be clearing of throat, twitching of shoulders. There can be various presentations. There can be simple or complex, tics based on the group of muscles involved or vocalization involved. Okay. Most commonly, what we see in our practice is Tourette syndrome, but as an organic possibility, there is a whole list of table. But again, it is degenerative in nature, more commonly seen after encephalitis or encephalopathies. Okay, so post encephalitis or post encephalopathy presentations can be commonly seen. Takes. Now, tremors, coming to the second part, it is again involuntary rhythmic oscillation movements that results from an alternating or a synchronous contraction of reciprocally innervated antagonist muscles. Now, obviously, this is very important because the physiological aspect of tremor is something that to do with the innervation in itself. Okay, so it's the antagonist muscles, the reciprocally innervated muscles are alternatingly contracting. So that is why we find tremors. Again, they are classified at rest or tremors when a particular action is being done. So tremors at rest or action tremors. We'll try to look at some of those examples in the videos. More common what we see is the rest tremors or the pin rolling type of tremors, what we see with Parkinson's, either idiopathic Parkinson's or a drug-induced Parkinson's. So this is a video which clearly, depicts the rest tremors, high intensity, vigorous tremors of the patient, and then there is the spin rolling movement in this patient. Usually this is associated with muscle fatigue. There is bradykinesia. Okay, so this is how resting tremors of Parkinson's are present. This is a video where we try to demonstrate action tremors. It's case of alcohol dependence syndrome, admitted with us for de-addiction. There are two videos, obviously. You can see the tremors which occur at the end of the goal-directed movements. So that is something which tells us about the cerebellar involvement, and that is very common with action tremors in cerebellar involvement with patients of alcohol dependence syndrome. Now again, the finger nose test demonstrates that as the patient tries to touch the finger of the examiners, there are very mild tremors. Okay. So this is different from the resting tremors what we saw with case of Parkinson's, where it was a very vigorous, high intensity tremors. Now, other moments which are based on this displacement activity, which are very common and not to be missed, are chorea and athetosis. Usually they occur together. Chorea is defined as an excessive spontaneous movements that irregularly timed. It's a non-repetitive, randomly distributed, and have a dance-like quality. It basically involves the larger muscle areas, larger joints, okay, trunk, okay, shoulders. So that these are something associated with bigger joints, whereas athetosis are spontaneous, slow, rhythmic, twisting movements, especially involving small joints of the hands. But most commonly, what we see as chorea and athetosis occurring together because they have a common neuroanatomical basis. So we have a video here. Now, before I play the video, I would like to say that this is a case which was referred to our OPD by the locals, and the girl, the young adolescent girl, was taken to multiple faith healers, thinking that she has been possessed by some demons. Right? And that was responsible for her abnormal movements, which she presented to us at the presentation. So that was the only complaint: abnormal involuntary movements, nothing else. And she was taken to different faith healers, and then ultimately presented to us. So just please have a look at this, and we'll try to explain it in the end. Again, it's unilateral.
ಅಗಲ ಮಾಡಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಸಲ ಇಲ್ಲ ಒಂದ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹೊತ್ತು ಇರ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಕೆಳಗೆ ಬಿಡಿ ಕೆಳಗೆ ಬಿಡಿ
This is a classical sign which is described even in textbooks, known as milkmaid sign. I mean, you can just observe her left hand as she is trying to hold the examiner's fingers, grip the fingers. Yeah, now this is a classical presentation of athetosis. Now, this is a case of Sydenham's chorea presented to us. This was quite some time, few years back. The patient having the small dance-like, movements of her left wrist, and then on examination there is this classical sign, what is known as a milkmaid sign. Okay, that is happens because of alternating contractions and release of muscles, and they are involuntary movements. The patient was then evaluated for the streptococcal infection and was treated. That was the only presentation. Sometimes these presentations are missed. Sometimes they are considered as functional. Sometimes they are considered as dissociative in nature, or maybe an attention-seeking behavior. But a careful examination is very important. So we need not miss these presentations. Then these movements can be induced also, like chorea, athetosis, tics and tremors, like they are spontaneous, but these abnormal movements can sometimes be induced, and what we probably see in cases of catatonia. Now, something called as automatic obedience, where patient carries out every instructions regardless of the consequences. Now, what Kalbam described in his examination, or to demonstrate automatic obedience, is very clear, that you instruct the patient to put out their tongue, and at the same time you tell them that once they put out their tongue, you are going to prick the tongue with a sharp object. Okay, so when you give this instruction in automatic obedience, it is commonly seen that the patient generally follows on that instruction and put the tongue out, even in spite of you making it very clear that you are going to prick the tongue with a nail or with a sharp object. That is something known as automatic obedience, very commonly seen with catatonia. Then there are echo phenomena, echopraxia or echolalia, where the patient echoes either the movements of the examiners, or there is a complete automatic obedience without even considering the consequences to it, something like a mirror image. And echolalia, where the words or phrases are repeated. So they are part of echo phenomena, which is commonly seen with catatonia. We had a case with catatonia, and again an adolescent girl, where you can see in this video where the girl imitates the movements what the examiners tried to do. Now, this is an echo phenomena, echopraxia. Also, you can observe the posture of that patient, posture, how she's standing, how much of mobility she is able to demonstrate. This patient was mute, present to us in catatonia. It was just few weeks back. Again, there was history of depressive symptoms prior to onset of catatonic symptoms. But again, you can see here, like she's imitating, copying the examiner's movement, even in terms of lateralization of activities. Along with that, you can see that the patient has an odd posture which is maintained. She's bent to the left side at her hip. Again, we'll see that in later. It again a part of the presentation of catatonia itself. Okay, not just the echo phenomena is there. The patient was mute. Okay, so associated with echopraxia, there is posturing. Okay, we'll have a demonstration of the abnormal postures also, like psychological, physiological pillow and other things. So this is how the presentation occurs. Moving ahead with this automatic obedience is something called as active obedience and passive obedience. Mid-Machen is something where even a small pressure or a small instruction is enough for the movement to occur. The body can be put into any position without any resistance on the part of the patient. When this happens, this is very clear that as a part of your instruction, you need to mention that they need not allow the movements to occur, and they can resist the movements. So when that contrary instruction you give and still there is a movement that occurs, there is cooperation that occurs, that is called as Mid-Machen. Mid-Hagen is again extreme form of cooperation, which is also known as angle pose lamp sign. A small pressure at the back of the occiput is enough for the patient to completely bend over. Okay, so the other example which is given in the catatonic examination part is that you put a hand below the arm of the patient and you put a slight pressure and you tell them that not to lift the arm. But even a small pressure in the patient's arm below is enough and the patient lifts the arm. This is something known as passive obedience. Gaggen-Halton is a sign of frontal lobe involvement seen with various conditions in psychiatry. Schizophrenia is one which can have this presentation. Catatonia can have this presentation, but more often seen with degenerative brain disorders, even mild cognitive impairment or dementia. It is nothing but an opposition where there is patient opposes all passive movements with the same degree at which the examiner tries to make those movements. Okay, so if there is a small pressure with terms of examination, the resistance is very small. As the pressure increases, the resistance also increases. This is basically a sign of frontal lobe involvement. Negativism is different from this opposition. Negativism apparently is a motiveless resistance to all the interference and may or may not be associated with outspoken defensive attitude. Now, generally, when we say negativism or a negativism in terms of examination, we see that the patient is either hostile or guarded or voluntarily resisting your examination or your instructions. So, which is expressed verbally, but that is not the case with negativism, again, which is described in catatonia as a part of motiveless resistance. Ambitendency is a manifestation of ambivalency. Ambivalence is a cognitive phenomena where an individual is faced with two contradicting or conflicting situation, is unable to decide to and for. So it's that confusion, and when that ambivalency is there, the acts which follow because of ambivalency is tend to known as ambitendency. Now again, this is a part of spectrum of negativism. Initially, there will be ambitendency, and then if ambitendency progresses, it can go on to become a negativism, and more commonly seen with catatonia. Again, it is important to recognize ambitendency because if not recognized and treated, then we can see that ambitendency progresses to negativism as a part of these abnormal movements. Again, a part of catatonic presentations, different examinations have been described to demonstrate these things. The common thing is like you ask the patient to shake his hand, and then you see that the patient would either initially come close to shake your hand, then take the hand back, and this to and fro movement of trying to shake and not to shake hand will be there. So there could be different instructions. It can be seen even in clinical examination also. That is ambitendency. Now, these abnormal induced movements, what we also see is perseveration. A perseveration could be a movement disorder. Perseveration could be a disorder of thought or language. Perseveration is nothing but senseless repetition of a goal-directed action that has already served its purpose. Now, again, there are three types. Compulsive repetition, where the act is performed unless a second stimulus or a second instruction is given. Impairment of switching occurs when there is a compulsive repetition occurring and you give a second instruction, but the patient can't shift from the first act to the second act. So that is impairment of switching. Whereas ideational perseveration is, it is the theme, it is the central theme of the idea or the act is repeated, not necessarily the words or phrases or movements themselves. So they are explained either in form of verbal perseveration or even motor acts. Okay. What is more important to realize or understand here is stereotypy is spontaneous. That is, there is no stimulus required to demonstrate stereotypy. It's an spontaneous act. Whereas for perseveration, there should be a stimulus first. And they say that in perseveration, the first stimulus is always attempted correctly. Say, for example, if you ask the patient to lift his right hand, okay, so he is able to lift the right hand. So then your second instruction is to lift the left hand, okay, but the patient still keeps on lifting the right hand. So perseveration is always induced. That same holds good for verbal perseveration also. If you ask his name, the patient is able to tell his name. But then the second question, if you ask where he's from, he continues to tell his name. Okay. Whereas stereotypy is spontaneous. Now, this is how you differentiate between these two abnormal movements. Forced grasping, again, a sign of degenerative behavior disorder, something similar to grasp reflex. Despite frequent instruction not to touch the examiner's hand, the patient continues to do so. Okay, so again, it is very important what instructions you give. Whereas in grasp reflex, it's a reflex which is induced, a primitive reflex which is induced by striking the palm of the patient, either through 2 digits or by using a instrument. And extreme form of this grasp reflex is seen especially with catatonia or organic brain disorders, which is called as a magnet reaction, where there is a sudden rapid grasping of the examiner's hands. I think I have a video of it also. Let me see if we can play it. Okay, again, this is the same patient of catatonia demonstrating grasp reflex here. You can see the examiner strokes the palm of the patient from medial to lateral side, and then there is a spontaneous gripping or there is a spontaneous holding. It's not coming?
Not see, not see.
Okay, fine, it's okay. Fine. Now, coming to the motor speech disturbances, I'll just take a few minutes. I'm not going to cover all these things again. What we see is perseveration, again, which can be a verbal also. Mannerism and stereotypies can be both motor as well as verbal. Attitude to conversation depends upon the underlying mood state, and the flow and the rate of speech, I think, which have already been described in the previous sections. I'm not going to touch on that. How does different mood states or psychopathology decides the rate and flow of speech and the abnormality associated with this. Now, verbal stereotypy is important for us because it is very commonly seen in children with autism. Okay, more than the psychotic illnesses, what we commonly come across is children with autism. Now, verbal stereotypy are words, phrases, or they can be some incomprehensible sounds also, depending upon the age, that are spoken spontaneous or set off by a question. Now, the important part to remember here is in autism, they can be a non-functional vocalization. That means they may not serve any purpose. They may not serve any meaning. They may not have any social meaning to whatever is repeated. Okay, and they are automatically reinforcing. So they are self-stimulating for children with autism. So children with autism, when they are not stimulated by an external environment, get self-absorbed, and then these verbal stereotypies are commonly observed or commonly seen. There's a small audio clip, I think, makes some sense. So this is something which is very common. There can be incomprehensible sounds which the child keeps on repeating, and this is verbal stereotypy, which is very common with autism. Okay, verbigeration again has to be differentiated from perseveration. Verbigeration is spontaneous, compulsive repetition of seemingly meaningless words, phrases, or sentences without regard to a stimulus. Again, it is a spontaneous thing. There may not be any stimulus, whereas for perseveration, you need to have a stimulus. Something called as Rückstimme is a German word which is described in the book, where there are strangled voice or whispers. Even I'm not very sure about what examples to give for that. And this is something which is again described as a motor disturbances in psychiatric conditions. There can be mannerisms in the way you spell a particular word or you use a particular phrase or a sentence. And again, they serve a purpose. Again, they are repetitive, but they serve some goal directed activities. So mannerisms can be a motor or a verbal act itself. Now coming to disorders of postures. Now initially what the literature mentions that it can be disorders of normal postures themselves, commonly seen with different mood states. In anxiety, there can be a distorted normal posture, the way the patient sits in front of you, the way the patient walks. Okay, so that can be a part of distorted normal postures. There can be a part of presentation of various personality disorders, attention seeking behaviors. So they can present with distorted normal postures. There can be manneristic postures, stereotype postures. Okay, so they are again a lot of overlapping presentations are there. Now, these things can be a part of abnormal movements. There can be a part of vocalization or verbal problems, or they can be related to a posture. Now, what is important for us is posture, because we do a lot of examination, and our specialty has to do with examinations with respect to postures, and we do come across a lot of problems in postures, especially regard to catatonia or even a drug-induced problems. A manneristic posture is something which is odd posture, exaggeration of a normal postures, and it is not rigidly preserved. The patient can keep on changing it. They can be seen in schizophrenia, or maybe a part of reaction to an underlying thought or a perceptual disturbances. Mannerism are very common in catatonia. Even the catatonia rating scales has a separate item for mannerisms. Stereotype posture, again, it is something which is similar to mannerism. It is very difficult to say that what is stereotypy and what is mannerism, because the only thing that differentiates between them is whether it is a goal-directed activity or a non-goal-directed activity. Now that becomes difficult in clinical assessment, but then they are otherwise also commonly seen. Stereotype postures are something which is non-adaptive, something which is uncomfortable or cannot be justified by the current social context or the environment. Something that is very important. This is a classical examination which is mentioned in the literature also, psychological pillow. So there is a demonstration of this catatonia patient with psychological pillow. I just want you to have a look at it. How this abnormal posture is maintained in this case of catatonia. You can even see that there is a posturing of her right arm. Okay, uninstructed posturing of her right arm along with the head. Now the pillow was removed, but still there is maintaining of that neck posture. You can clearly see here there is space. The posture is maintained for a pretty long time. Even with that neck, there is an abnormal posturing of the hand, which is very commonly seen, what we call as catalepsy or posturing in patients of catatonia. So this is what happens in terms of abnormal posturing. Again, the posturing was seen in the same video where the right arm was maintained, flexed at elbow and maintained for a long duration of time. Catalepsy is perseveration of this posture. What is important is when we either the patient maintains those abnormal postures all by themselves, or if they are induced by the examiner, the postures are maintained even after giving instruction to relax or change the posture if the patient wants to. So those instructions are very necessary. So you place the patient's arm or bend the patient's body in whatever position you want, but then you give them instruction and tell them that they can take back their posture or their arms to a normal position if they are not able to maintain it. So in spite of that instruction, if there is a maintaining of a particular posture, then we are looking at catalepsy. Baxi-flexibility is what an examiner experiences when you are trying to test for tone or muscle movements of the patient. So there is an initial resistance to these passive movements, which suddenly gives away at the end of the movement or end of the range of movement. and they say this experience is something very similar to experience what you get when you want to when you try to break a wax candle. So there is an initial resistance. You have to apply a sufficient amount of force, and then suddenly there is giving away of that resistance. Okay, so that is waxy flexibility, again commonly seen with catatonia. Again, this is the same patient. You can see what we are trying to demonstrate here is the posturing, how she maintains an abnormal posture. She is bent to her left side. There is flexing of her hip. And even while she sits on the chair, she just maintains that uncomfortable position. Just try to move it fast. In this case, this patient would always stand, bent on her left hip. She would always walk with her hip bent to the left side and partially twisted. That was something which the patient was maintaining all throughout her treatment. Now again, this is where examiner tries to maintain a posture of the patient. Initially, you can see that the patient maintains it for some time, and after the instructions that the patient can release the arm, she brings her arm down. There is a part of her behavior here which she would keep on repeating. She would just hit anybody who would pass by her with the right hand, and she would give no meaning to it. So whether we consider it as stereotypic behavior or a mannerism with catatonia is something one has to decide about it. And she would continue to do that. Now this is a posturing which is passively induced by the examiners. Non-goal directed and goal directed abnormal patterns of behavior. I think this is something very important. Stupor. For us, it is important to understand that stupor can be a part of presentation of a neuropsychiatric diagnosis as well as a functional diagnosis. What it is important for us is how to differentiate between organic presentation of stupor or stupor due to a functional diagnosis, especially a dissociative stupor. So it can be part of clinical examination, history, a proper thorough neurological examination, maybe some investigations like EEG. So they all help us to differentiate between organic stupor from a functional stupor. Stupor is something which is in the middle of the continuum. When we talk about level of alertness, if we have a complete alertness, being awakened on one end of the spectrum and coma at the other end of the spectrum, stupor lies somewhere in between where the patient is completely unresponsive, unresponsive to external stimulus. But if a very vigorous and persistent stimulus is given, a stuporous patient can be awakened. The patient can respond to those vigorous and persistent stimulus, but once the stimulus is taken away, patient goes back into the state of unresponsiveness. So that is what stupor is all about. For us, it is important to know differential diagnosis. Catatonia can present with stupor, depression can present with stupor. There is something called as a manic stupor, and obviously there are organic problems, neuropsychiatric organic problems, metabolic disturbances, neuroinfections. They all can present with stupors. Extreme hyperactivity, excitement as a part of non-goal directed behaviors, again a part of psychomotor excitement, could be because of manic excitement, could be because of catatonic excitement. In delirium, especially hyperactive delirium, we can see this non-goal directed hyper-excited behavior. Pathological intoxication, which we see when the patient is under intoxication, can present with these excited hyperactivity behaviors. So what is important to realize is an excitement can be a part of a state-dependent phenomena or a trait-dependent phenomena, or can be a part of organic problems. So these are all motor disorders which are non-goal directed. Goal directed behaviors are something which are serves a purpose, like aggressive behavior can be a deliberate self-harm or an aggression responding to an emotional turmoil. Compulsive rituals as a part of OCD, suicide behaviors, disinhibited behavior as a part of chronic mental illnesses, or wandering behavior, what we commonly see with fugue or dissociative identity disorders. So they are goal-directed abnormal patterns of behavior. So some of the culture-bound syndromes also come under this, like Koro or Lata, where the presentation is an abnormal pattern of behavior. Obviously there are reasons, psychological reasons for that, but then again they are their presentation is related to an abnormal patterns of behavior, what we commonly see. So there are different disorders which can come under them. Now, most important, and this is the last part, what is relevant to us is drug-induced movement disorders. Okay, I don't know how much of this has been covered in the neurology section or previous psychiatry section, but this is very important. We see dystonias, tardive dyskinesias, and akathisias, and obviously we have tremors and extrapyramidal symptoms of Parkinson's. But what is more important for as a part of movement disorders presentation independently is dystonias. Dystonias are involuntary muscle contractions, frequently which cause squeezing or twisting movements, and they maintain an abnormal posture. So this is something that is very painful also, as well as disturbing for the patient. Akathisia is a subjective feeling of inner restlessness, which is most of the time associated with a strong sense of urge or compulsion to move about. So that is why the patient is not able to sit at one place. TDs, which obviously as sir was describing, is not very common these days because of the type of medications or treatment which are available, but then we do tend to see them occasionally, characterized by abnormal involuntary movements. They are associated with choreoathetoid movements of either the face muscles or the muscles of the neck or the trunk. We have a video demonstrating both dystonia and TD. One of this obviously a dystonia is because of post-viral encephalitis admitted with neurology. It has nothing to do with psychiatry, but you can see how there is twisting, abnormal postures maintained at neck, both the upper limbs. There is a flexing of one upper limb, there is extension of the other upper limb. And the patient is maintaining these abnormal postures with wide open mouth. So this is a classical presentation of dystonia. We sometimes very commonly see with acute antipsychotic induced dystonias, otherwise also. TD is something which is very rare. I just want you to observe this video because this is very classical. I don't know how many of you have actually observed orofacial tardive dyskinesia.
69. 45 years old. BA ಓದಿದ್ವಿ. ಈಗ 6 months ಇಂದ ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊಂಟಿಲ್ಲ. ಏನಿತ್ತು ಹೇಳ್ರಿ ನಿಮ್ ಜಾಬ್ ಅವಾಗ? ಓಕೆ. ಅವಾಗ ಏನ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತ ಕನ್ಸಲ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಿ?
See, what you can classically see in that video is how his speech and his vocalizations are interrupted by those involuntary movements of his lips and his tongue, and it is also associated with the choreoathetoid movements of his upper limbs. Now, this is a classical presentations of tardive dyskinesia. This patient was treated for schizophrenia for more than 10 years. And then following which he developed the symptoms, although currently asymptomatic, he presented to us because of these problems of abnormal movement. Now, this is again very important to understand that although we rarely see TDs these days, but then again, it is not something which is totally absent or gone away. Okay, so we can see with TDs with even second generation antipsychotics. So one has to be very careful and one has to actually look for, ask for such movements. Very subtle tardive movements or tardive dyskinetic movements are very commonly seen with somebody who is on treatment with antipsychotics for many years. The duration of treatment makes a lot of difference, and even with second generation antipsychotics, we do tend to see these movements. So yeah, I think they have taken a lot of time. I think this is a presentation based on what was given in the textbook, and I think I have covered most of the things which are relevant to our practice and our specialty. At the end, I would like to thank my department, especially my colleagues and my postgraduate students who have helped me in making these presentations, shot the videos, shared their videos of their personal experiences, and helped me to make this presentation a more presentable one. So I would like to thank all of them. I would like to thank again IPSKC, especially Dr. Vijay, Dr. Sachin, Dr. Narayan, for giving me this opportunity. And I hope this presentation is of some help. If anybody wants to have these videos, they can have a look at them. And yes, I think we are good to take a couple of questions, sir.
Harisha sir.
Yeah, there is one question in the question box. How is mannerism, that is abnormal maintenance of a posture, different from posturing of catatonia?
So posturing in catatonia is something which is maintained without any purpose. Mannerisms are something which are explained as purposeful movements. They are repetitive movements which serves as a purpose. That is something that is defined as mannerisms. Posturing in catatonia is a mundane posture which is maintained by the patient, or it can be induced by the examiner, but it doesn't serve any purpose. So mannerisms are sometimes repeated acts. It can be simple, like suppose a repeated touching of your head, or a repeated clearing of your throat. So they serve a purpose and they are repetitive acts, and that is part of mannerism. Whereas posturing in catatonia is maintaining an abnormal, uncomfortable position, or a position which is maintained for a long duration of time without any purpose. How to demonstrate negativism? So negativism is demonstrated by, again, your examination part. Say, for example, if you want to test negativism, you ask the patient that you would like to see for the movements at the arm, or the movements at the elbow, or movements at the wrist joint. So any passive movements, okay, any passive movements or any passive instruction you give to the patient, there is a resistance to that. And that resistance is directly proportional to the amount of force which you are using when you are demonstrating those movements. I guess I have a video of it, but I have not posted it on this presentation. So negativism is something that is a purposeless opposition. It doesn't serve any purpose. It's a motiveless resistance, what they call it. So it's not serving any motive for the patient himself or herself. Catalepsy versus posturing in catatonia. What is the difference? Catalepsy is perseveration of that posturing or the abnormal posture that is maintained. It's just that if the posturing is spontaneous by the patient, it's called as posturing. Catalepsy is something that is associated with maintaining of these postures for a long duration time, and at times associated with waxy flexibility and mutism. So some textbooks say that catalepsy is combination of posturing with mutism and with waxy flexibility. Okay, otherwise they are synonymously used. I guess I was audible.
You are audible. You are audible.
Yes, yes. No more questions, I think.
Yeah, people want to go back to RCB, I guess.
I don't know. No questions on chat box as well.
Yeah, it is a wonderful presentation by our Dr. Samir. And it is very difficult to understand all these terminologies. You should keep reading, and with every reading, you will understand better and better. And it is said that this fish psychopathology is known for brevity, because the apt words are being used and it is very concise, and you should keep reading. So understanding motor disorder is very important in our clinical practice, especially for treatment and outcome. in the past, before the introduction of the newer antipsychotic, we could see many such cases of motor disorders. Now I am very sure Dr. Samir is very lucky to have that catatonic patients, because I have not seen the catatonia for many years like. So it is very rare to see such patients. And even all EPS, extrapyramidal symptoms, are very rare. But however, we should be very careful while prescribe the drugs, especially with the newer laws. We should be very much careful about the medical legal aspects also. So in this context, everybody should be able to understand the concept of motor disorders and should go for a careful and judicious practice. Thank you, Dr. Samir. And thank you, Dr. Mutalik and Dr. Kiran and all the IPSKC office bearers.
Thank you very much, sir. Harish, do you want to say something?
No, sir, nothing. We can proceed ahead. We can conclude this if there are no more formalities.
Okay, thank you. It was a wonderful and informative, excellent presentation by Dr. Samir Mangalwedi. Thank you very much, sir. And I would like to thank our today's chairperson, Dr. Harisha Dalantapattu, for sparing time for the IPSKC event. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank all our IPSKC office bearer, president, and secretary, and our co-moderator, Dr. Harish Kulkarni. And lastly, I would like to thank ICON team for the wonderful Tele-Arogya series from Zoom platform. Thank you one and all for participating in this IPSKC psychopathology series. We have the last series next Friday on personality disorders. Thank you. Please attend the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.